The year 1951 witnessed the nascent stages of the intellectual ferment that would, 2 decades later, culminate in the publication of John Rawls' seminal work, A Theory of Justice. While the full flowering of Rawls' thought lay ahead, the ground was being meticulously prepared, the seeds of his revolutionary ideas carefully sown in the fertile soil of post-war political philosophy. To understand the import of a theory of justice, one must first appreciate the intellectual landscape it arose from, a landscape marked by the dominance of utilitarianism and the decline of traditional natural law theory. Utilitarianism, with its focus on maximizing overall happiness, held sway as a dominant ethical framework. Its allure stemmed from its apparent simplicity and its promise of a scientifically grounded approach to moral questions. The principle of utility, which advocates for actions that produce the greatest good for the greatest number, offered a seemingly clear criterion for judging the rightness or wrongness of actions and social policies. Yet, utilitarianism faced significant criticisms. Critics argued it could, in certain circumstances, justify the infringement of individual rights and the imposition of burdens on minorities, all in the name of maximizing aggregate welfare. The inherent instability of interpersonal comparisons of utility further complicated its practical application. How could one reliably measure and compare the subjective experiences of happiness or suffering among different individuals? Where utilitarianism fell short, existing natural law theory offered little recourse, though providing a conception of fundamental individual rights. Its basis in divine or natural orders was increasingly difficult to sustain in an era of scientific and philosophical skepticism. Rawls, deeply concerned with the injustices of the existing social order, began to seek an alternative framework, one that could reconcile individual rights with social justice. His intellectual odyssey was profoundly shaped by his experiences during World War II. Witnessing the horrors of conflict and the systematic dehumanization of individuals, he became acutely aware of the need for principles that could safeguard human dignity and ensure fair treatment for all. These experiences informed the ethical considerations that became the foundation of his theory. Furthermore, Rawls' close reading of the works of Immanuel Kant proved to be hugely influential. Kant's emphasis on the inherent worth and autonomy of individuals, alongside his concept of the categorical imperative, offered a compelling alternative to the utilitarian focus on consequences. Rawls found in Kant a basis for a moral philosophy that prioritized principles of justice, duty, and respect for persons. Rawls' work, though not formally published until 1971, began to take shape through a series of influential papers during the 1950s and 1960s. These presented embryonic versions of ideas later elaborated upon in A Theory of Justice. While the core argument of A Theory of Justice is well known, it is worth briefly revisiting its central tenets to fully appreciate its impact. Rawls proposed a thought experiment, the original position, in which individuals, behind a veil of ignorance, deliberate about the principles that should govern their society. This veil of ignorance prevents individuals from knowing their own social status, natural talents, and personal preferences. Within this framework, Rawls argued, rational individuals would agree to principles of justice that would protect their fundamental interests. The two central principles of justice that Rawls proposed were the equal liberty principle and the difference principle. The equal liberty principle states that each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive total system of equal basic liberties compatible with a similar system of liberty for all. The difference principle allows social and economic inequalities only if they benefit the least advantaged members of society. The intellectual architecture of A Theory of Justice is complex and multifaceted. Rawls drew heavily on social contract theory, a tradition that dates back to the works of Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. However, Rawls sought to improve upon the classical social contract approach, addressing the failures of utilitarianism, with its emphasis on individual rights and fairness. Central to his argument is the idea of reflective equilibrium, the process by which we arrive at a coherent set of moral principles by iteratively adjusting our intuitions, judgments, and principles. This process involves a constant interplay between our considered moral judgments and the theoretical principles we employ to justify them. When these do not align, we are compelled to adjust our principles, reconsider our judgments, or both, until we achieve a state of reflective equilibrium. This iterative process provides a framework for arriving at a set of moral principles, and for justifying them. The direct applications and immediate impact of Rawls' early formulations were felt, albeit indirectly, within the burgeoning field of political philosophy. His work challenged the prevailing utilitarian consensus and reinvigorated theoretical debates about justice, fairness, and the ideal organization of society. While A Theory of Justice itself was decades away, these preliminary publications, though small, signaled the coming of a significant new voice, one that would eventually transform the field. The impact was primarily felt in academic circles. It would slowly percolate outwards, influencing legal scholars, policymakers, and social reformers. The influence was less about immediately enacting specific legislation based on Rawls' principles and more about shifting the intellectual climate. He encouraged people to think about justice in new ways, to consider the moral implications of established practices and institutions. The influence of Rawls' thought, subsequently, has been immense and multifaceted. A theory of justice reinvigorated the field of political philosophy, which had been in a relative state of stagnation for much of the 20th century. It provided a powerful defense of liberal egalitarianism, a political philosophy that combines a commitment to individual rights and freedoms with a concern for social and economic equality. His ideas have been taken up in many different fields. The work has had a profound impact on legal theory. Rawls' emphasis on fairness and impartiality resonated with legal scholars, who began to apply his ideas to real issues such as constitutional law, criminal justice, and distributive justice. The work's influence extended to moral and ethical theory, with Rawls' ideas about reflective equilibrium and the nature of moral reasoning. Furthermore, the work has been applied within economics, with many using his ideas related to distributive justice. There are, however, areas where the reception was less than universally positive. Rawls' work has also been subject to significant criticisms. One common criticism is that his theory is overly abstract and detached from the realities of everyday life. Critics have argued that the original position is a hypothetical construct and that the principles of justice derived from it cannot be readily applied to concrete social problems. Others have questioned the assumptions underlying Rawls' theory, such as his conception of rational choice and his emphasis on individual autonomy. Another criticism is the cultural specificity of Rawls' theory. Critics have argued that his ideas are rooted in Western liberal traditions and may not be applicable to other cultures or societies. Libertarian thinkers criticized the difference principle, arguing it sacrifices individual liberty. Feminist scholars, for example, criticized Rawls' inattention to issues of gender and the family. These criticisms, rather than undermining Rawls' influence, have served to clarify his arguments and provoke further debate, contributing to the ongoing development of theories of justice. Several individuals and intellectual traditions were directly influential in shaping Rawls' thinking. Foremost among these was Immanuel Kant, whose emphasis on individual autonomy and the categorical imperative profoundly shaped Rawls' approach to moral philosophy. The social contract tradition, particularly as articulated by Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, provided the framework for Rawls' thought experiment, the original position. Furthermore, Rawls was influenced by the works of legal theorists such as H.L.A. Hart, whose concept of primary and secondary rules helped him to develop his understanding of the structure and function of social institutions. Another significant influence was the work of the economist Kenneth Arrow, whose work on social choice theory helped Rawls to clarify his understanding of collective decision-making. These influences, coming from various schools of thought, contributed to the creation of a unique perspective. The influence of a theory of justice continues to be felt across many disciplines. His work has influenced the development of theories in areas such as ethics, political science, law, and economics. Within ethics, Rawls' ideas of reflective equilibrium have become a standard tool for moral reasoning. In political science, his emphasis on justice and fairness has guided debates about the nature of democracy and the organization of social institutions. In law, his principles of justice have informed judicial decisions and legal scholarship. In economics, his emphasis on distributive justice has shaped debates over income inequality and social welfare. Beyond academia, his ideas have influenced numerous social and political movements, from the civil rights movement to contemporary movements for social justice. Rawls' work, while rooted in the intellectual currents of the mid-20th century, has become a touchstone for debates about justice, fairness, and the good society. His ideas have inspired new thinking about the relationship between the individual and the state, the ethical foundations of social institutions, and the pursuit of a more just world. The legacy of a theory of justice lies not just in the specific principles it articulated, but in the framework for thinking about justice that it established. It has inspired countless scholars, activists, and policymakers to grapple with the fundamental questions of how we should organize our societies and how we can create a more just and equitable world.